Welcome. Today we are going to be taking apart a Dell Precision 7510. So to begin, we're just going to be using a small Phillips head bit. This is a 2.5. So you're going to flip it over and just kind of push that slider out, and then you want some kind of flat tool or your fingernails to push that cover laterally, and then you can remove it from the bottom. And same with this cover. We're just going to push it laterally the other way, and then we can remove it from the bottom. Alright, at this point you have easy access to your Wi-Fi card, your DC jack, SSD drive, looks like just one screw, and then your classic spinning hard drive. So we're going to remove all of this, and then we're going to finish taking apart the palm rest assembly and the display. So we'll go ahead and start with the Wi-Fi card. And just use your fingernails or whatever and just pop those antennas straight up and off. And then you might need to pry up that card a little bit. Sometimes there's some sticky stuff behind it, and then you can just pull it out of the slot. And then since we are going to be removing the display, I'm going to go ahead and just thread these Wi-Fi antennas out of the little grooves. That way they're ready to pull through when we get to that step. Alright, so the SSD drive looks like just one screw, so we're just going to remove that. No drive in there, it's just a cover, but if you need to replace that drive, once you remove this metal cover, it'll just kind of flip up a little bit and then you can pull it straight out. Alright, so for the hard drive, we're going to remove the 4 screws. And using their little handy tab here, we're going to pull that hard drive outwards from the SATA connector here. And then to remove the hard drive, there's 2 screws on each side. Alright, so the param battery is going to stay with the motherboard, and it looks like we can go ahead and just leave that alone. And for now, we'll just go ahead and finish disconnecting any of the cables that are still hooked up. So we can leave the SATA connector, but when we want to remove the motherboard, we're going to be doing it from the other side, so we want to make sure that there's nothing else plugged in on this side that's going to prevent us from removing that motherboard. So we'll go ahead and wiggle out that connector for the DC jack. And then we can also remove the little retainer here for the DC jack. Go ahead and wiggle that out. Alright, so looking from the bottom, we've basically disconnected everything on this side that is connecting the motherboard. And then we'll just, while we're down here, we'll go ahead and flip up the little retainers for the keyboard and touchpad ribbons. And these have notched ends, so you need to lift up and pull out at the same time to remove that ribbon. These little notches here on either side will prevent it from just coming straight out, so you'll need to lift up on it. And it's a good idea to flip that connector or the retainer back down so it doesn't get broken. Okay. Now, our next step is going to be to remove the palm rest. There's a lot of screws here labeled P for palm rest. Those are the screws that need to be removed, but since I'm disassembling the entire chassis, I'm going to go ahead and remove all the screws that I can see here at the bottom. Alright, now that we have all of these screws removed, I'm going to go ahead and flip it back over. And using a little flat tool, we're going to go around this keyboard frame and just gently start popping the frame up. Alright, once you have one end, you just kind of gently start pulling up on it, maybe giving a little wiggle as you're working it up, and then you can remove that, which will allow you access to the other screws that you need to remove, which are underneath the frame here and within the keyboard. Alright, so I think we got all of these screws. So I'll just get a fingernail underneath the little tabs here at the bottom of the keyboard. And the last part to come out are these big tabs here at the very top of the keyboard, so just make sure that you're not prying too hard anywhere at the very top. And since we already disconnected the keyboard and touchpad ribbons, they'll just come straight out. Alright, now we can finish removing these screws to remove the palm rest. Alright, so we went ahead and just removed the cover door as well for the memory. And since it's nice and open, we'll go ahead and remove that memory stick while we're here. Alright, so it looks like we have a ribbon kind of looped over the inside of the palm rest. So we're going to lift up on this retainer. There's kind of a notch on either side. So just lift it gently on one side and then the other and then the other, and that should pop it all the way up without breaking it. And you'll just want to unstick that ribbon from the palm rest as well. It's going to pull through as we're lifting the palm rest off of the chassis. Alright, so you can, with this one you can just push maybe push gently on the motherboard to get that palm rest started. It doesn't take a lot to get it to pop up. And then we'll just give it a little wiggle and see if there's anything else stuck to it. Looks like this ribbon might be stuck to the bottom side, so we're going to go ahead and lift up on this connector as well. And then pop that ribbon out. It's always best to be real gentle when you're just starting to remove a component, just in case there's something that you didn't see that's still connected. In this case, I see now that there's a small cable going through to this connector here. So we're going to go ahead and just pull that connector up and out of the motherboard. All right, now that should be the final thing, and we can remove that palm rest. So it was definitely 3 more things that needed to be disconnected to remove that palm rest. All right, now I think we're going to go ahead and remove this display. It kind of leaves the chassis kind of unbalanced while we're working on it. So I'll go ahead and just remove these hinge covers first. You'll need to open the display all the way up to remove those covers. Alright, so we already have the Wi-Fi antennas disconnected from the other side, so the only other cable coming out of the display is the cable for the LCD. So we're going to go ahead and remove that cable from the motherboard. And with this type of connector, you just pull straight up, but I always recommend putting a finger on the motherboard next to it, because sometimes these can be really hard to pull up and you hear kind of like a small crunching sound for the real tough ones, and that's never a good thing when you're working on a laptop. I think it's just a piece of tape or something holding that in there right now. But this cable should be free to kind of pull out, but it looks like they've wrapped the heatsink with tape and then partially secured the video cable with it. I'm not sure what that's about, but I'll go ahead and fix that. Alright, so there's our free video cable, and then the Wi-Fi cables will pull out of the little hole there as we're removing the display. It looks like the hinges are just held on here at the top. There are 4 more screws in the back, but I don't think those are for the hinges, so we'll just go ahead and remove this display assembly. Nope, those. So currently the hinge is also held on by the 2 outside Phillips head screws, so we'll just go ahead and remove those as well. usually like to do this with the lid open. Let's see if we can carefully, yeah. Okay, so as you see, we'll just go ahead and lift up on that display assembly and then make sure those Wi-Fi antennas feed through that hole without catching and ripping off the little ends. So for now, we'll just go ahead and set that display assembly aside. And then we'll continue taking apart the motherboard. All right, so this one has a discrete video card, and it looks like the fans are separate. Okay, so we'll go ahead and remove these cooling fans. No, maybe not. These may come off as an assembly, or they're... I don't see any more screws. Okay, so for now we'll just go ahead and disconnect both of the cooling fans, and then we're going to remove the 8 screws here for the heat sinks. So you'll notice the numbers on the heat sinks. These are the order in which you're supposed to tighten down the heat sinks if you're installing them with new thermal paste. That way it will tighten down evenly and spread the thermal paste evenly. But if you're just removing the heat sinks, it doesn't matter which order. So these screws are retained on the back, so you'll know it's all the way loose when you hear it start clicking. Okay, so once you have those screws loosened, we can remove the fan and the heatsink as an assembly. It looks like the fans are definitely attached to the heatsink. Alright, so this laptop has a discrete GPU, so we'll go ahead and remove that by removing the 2 screws. And then we can just kind of wiggle it out of the connector. Alright, so it looks like we only have a couple more ribbons to disconnect from the motherboard, and then we can remove it. So if you remember this type of connector, you're just going to lift up on it and pull the ribbon out, and then you can just push it back in. And then the connector for the speakers, we're just going to get some fingernails on the little tabs and wiggle it out. Just pull straight out. Alright, so it looks like the USB board is separate as well, so we're going to remove that. And just going to kind of lift up. Sometimes it'll pop off, but the connector is just a hard plastic connector. So once you start prying up on it, it'll pop off of there. Then you can remove it. And same for the other side. And just keep in mind the front of the ports poke through the bottom case, so you always want to lift from the inner part and then pull them out of the little port cuttings. Alright, so now we can go ahead and finish removing the screws on the motherboard. Just give a quick check on the bottom and make sure we've taken off all the screws down here. Looks good. All right. All right, once you have these screws out, then we'll just go ahead and give that motherboard a wiggle. If it feels nice and loose, then you can slowly pull it free from the case. All right, so we're left with a small LED board. Go ahead and leave that be, and then the front speakers are just held on by little rubber grommets. It looks like the two middle screws are just, I guess that's part of a cover or something here on the back. Otherwise, everything's been taken apart on the bottom case except for just a couple of speakers and the one hard drive connector. So now we will move on to the display assembly. Alright, so for most laptops, the way you separate them is to find the seam between the front bezel and the back cover and just start going along with a flat tool and popping it out of there. So this back cover's got a small crack on the very top, so I'm going to start from one of the sides here. Take your time and be methodical. Just go around the perimeter. So it looks like on this one they have taped the bezel as well as using the little perimeter catch retainers. So as you go along, we're just going to need to keep a finger in there and just make sure that we're not pulling too much up on any kind of plastic backing or anything they have around the LCD, because sometimes this black stuff can just get yanked up with the bezel and it's just better not to. And most of the time the bottom is really taped. This one does not seem too bad. Alright, so once you've unstuck that bezel, you'll see we have access to all the little bits and pieces inside the back cover. And looks like the hinges have little integrated bars, so you'll need to do 5 screws to take off each hinge, but they're not connected to the LCD, so you can actually replace the hinge without having to remove the LCD. But if you want to remove the LCD, it's going to be the 4 screws around the perimeter there. Alright, once you've removed those 4 screws, we're going to go ahead and just tilt that LCD. Looks like they've used a decent amount of tape here. So we're going to peel back the little cover tape. And then just be very gentle at the end so you don't yank the connector out of the LCD. go. So once you get that tape pulled back, there's a small bar here that's kind of locking the connector in. So you're going to flip that little bar up with your fingernail, and then you can pull the LCD free from the video cable. Just be very gentle because it's an LED LCD display panel and it's very, very thin. Alright, so the video cable is just here in the middle, and we can go ahead and remove that. So we'll pull it up from that back cover and finish removing some of the tape around the webcam. Now, the webcam's just held on with glue, so just get a little bit of a pry on it from the top there and it'll pop right out. You don't want to pry from either end because the webcam's really thin and it'll bend it. Alright, so we'll go ahead and remove the hinge screws and then the hinges. And then of course this one screw can stay that's holding the rail onto the hinge if you want to keep them together. Alright, so lastly these Wi-Fi antennas. I'll just go ahead and peel off the excess tape here. And then we can unthread the Wi-Fi cables through the little channels and out from underneath this little backing tape here. Alright, so once you have those cables kind of freed up, we're gonna just pry from the top and get these Wi-Fi antennas out of the little notches up there. And then we'll just work that adhesive free from the backing there. So you just have to unstick it, there's nothing to unscrew. The Wi-Fi antenna itself is pretty thin, so it might be worth it to just kind of go kind of slow and just work each side individually. But as long as the antenna itself stays intact, the adhesive here is just to kind of keep it in place. But the actual antenna is this part right here, so as long as you don't break that, the antenna is going to work fine. Alright, so that is it. We are down to an empty back cover, and that is how you disassemble a Dell Precision 7510. If this video helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you.